They expected the Duke's own brother to speak. When Lord Marcus Vane stood before the entire court and accused Duke Adrian Vane of cowardice, treason, and dishonoring their father's legacy, every noble in the Grand Hall turned toward the younger brother, waiting for him to defend the family name. But Edmund Vane remained silent, his face pale, his hands trembling against his sides. And in that terrible, suspended moment, it was not blood that answered blood. It was the quiet translator no one had bothered to learn the name of, standing in the shadows behind a row of foreign dignitaries, who stepped forward and spoke the words that would shatter the hierarchy of the Vane estate forever. 6 weeks earlier, Isla Thorne had arrived at Vane Hall with instructions so simple they barely required explanation. Translate correspondence, assist with diplomatic guests, remain unobtrusive. She was skilled in 7 languages, accustomed to invisibility, and entirely unprepared for the cold tension that permeated every corridor of the estate. Duke Adrian Vane was a man carved from silence. He moved through rooms like winter itself, present, inevitable, but offering no warmth. His reputation preceded him, a war hero who had returned home to assume his title after their father's sudden death, a leader whose strategic brilliance had saved countless lives, and a brother whose relationship with Edmund had fractured so completely that they now communicated primarily through servants. Edmund was everything Adrian was not, charming where his brother was reserved, expressive where Adrian remained controlled, beloved by society where Adrian was respected from a distance. The younger Vane brother smiled easily, spoke warmly to staff, and filled rooms with laughter that felt almost desperate in its brightness. Isla noticed the pattern quickly. Whenever Adrian entered a room, Edmund found reasons to leave it. Whenever their paths crossed in hallways, Edmund's expression would tighten with something between resentment and grief before he looked away. And always, there was a third presence haunting the estate, Lord Marcus Vane, their uncle, who watched both brothers with eyes that calculated rather than comforted. She was translating a letter from a Prussian ambassador one morning when she first heard the argument. The library doors were thick, but voices raised in anger carried. "You abandoned him." Edmund's voice, raw with accusation. "You left father alone while you played soldier." Adrian's response came quieter, harder to hear. "I served where I was ordered. You served your own ambition. Father needed you, and you chose glory instead." Isla had carefully set down her pen and moved away from the door, unwilling to intrude further. But the words lingered, sketching the outline of a wound that had never healed. Over the following weeks, she began to understand the shapes of their grief. Edmund wore his openly, like a banner declaring his suffering to anyone who would listen. He spoke often of their father's final days, of letters Adrian never answered, of a deathbed the Duke had not reached in time. Society sympathized beautifully with Edmund's visible pain. Adrian's grief remained locked away. He worked from dawn until long after dark, managing estates, resolving disputes, ensuring every tenant and servant was cared for with meticulous precision. But he never spoke of his father, never defended himself against Edmund's accusations, never explained why he had not been present when the old Duke died. And his silence, as silence often does, was mistaken for guilt. Isla watched it all from her translator's corner, present but unseen, necessary but unacknowledged. She watched Adrian's shoulders tighten almost imperceptibly whenever Edmund left a room, watched him pause outside his brother's door some evenings, hand raised as if to knock, before turning away, watched the careful distance he maintained from everyone, as if afraid that closeness itself might cause harm. She watched, too, the way Lord Marcus moved through the estate, always present during family gatherings, always ready with sympathetic words for Edmund, always observing Adrian with an expression that seemed less concerned than anticipatory. It was during a formal dinner with foreign dignitaries that Isla first stepped beyond her assigned invisibility. A French ambassador had made a subtle comment in his own language, a remark about the Duke's convenient absence during his father's death, delivered with just enough ambiguity to seem like observation rather than insult. Several guests who understood French shifted uncomfortably. Adrian continued his meal, giving no indication he had heard. Edmund stared at his plate, jaw tight, and Isla, without fully deciding to speak, responded in flawless French. Convenient, seems a peculiar word for a man following direct orders from the crown during wartime. The ambassador's eyebrows rose. Ah, the translator speaks. When accuracy requires it. Her tone remained perfectly courteous, but the correction landed cleanly. Adrian's gaze lifted to her then, the first time he had truly looked at her since her arrival. Not with anger, but with something closer to surprise. Edmund glanced between them, his expression unreadable. That night, Isla received a summons to the Duke's study. When she entered, Adrian stood by the window, backlit by lamplight. "You spoke out of turn tonight," he said quietly. "I apologize, Your Grace. That is not what I asked for." He turned to face her. "Why did you answer him?" Isla met his gaze steadily. "Because what he implied was false. You cannot know that with certainty. I know you received orders. I translated the correspondence myself from the military archives you requested last week." Something shifted in his expression, a crack in the carefully maintained facade. "You read those." "It is my function to read everything requiring translation." She paused. "Including the letters you wrote to your father. 17 of them. Requesting leave. All denied." The silence that followed felt different from the cold quiet that usually filled Vane Hall. This one carried weight, recognition, the first breath of something breaking open. "No one else knows that," Adrian said finally. "No," Isla agreed. "They do not." And in that moment, watching the Duke's careful composure waver just slightly, she understood that the truth had been waiting all along for someone willing to speak it. Lord Marcus Vane called for the gathering 3 weeks later, and from the moment the announcement arrived, Isla felt the air in Vane Hall change. Every servant moved with nervous precision. Edmund grew quieter, his usual brightness dimmed to something brittle. And Adrian became even more unreachable than before, locked in his study with documents spread across every surface. The gathering would be formal, Marcus explained with sympathetic gravity. A chance for the Duke to address certain concerns that had arisen among family and allied houses about his fitness to lead the Vane estates. Nothing accusatory, of course. Simply an opportunity for transparency. Isla had translated enough political correspondence to recognize a trap disguised as courtesy. She found Edmund in the portrait gallery the evening before the gathering, staring up at their father's painting. For once, he did not leave when she approached. "You defended him," Edmund said quietly. "At the dinner." "What?" "Because the ambassador was wrong. Adrian let our father die alone." The words came out hollow, rehearsed, as if Edmund had repeated them so many times they had become truth through repetition alone. Isla hesitated, then chose her words carefully. "Your brother wrote 17 letters requesting leave to return home. All were denied by direct military order. I have read them." Edmund's head turned sharply. "That's not." "He never said." "He has said very little to anyone." "Then why not defend himself? Why let everyone believe?" Edmund's voice cracked. "Why let me believe?" "Perhaps," Isla said softly. "Because he thought you needed someone to blame more than you needed the truth." Edmund stared at her, something dawning in his expression that looked like horror and hope tangled together. But before he could respond, a servant appeared to summon him, and the moment slipped away. The great hall filled quickly the next afternoon. Every influential family allied with the Vanes attended, along with military officials, local magistrates, and enough nobility to transform the gathering into something between a council and a trial. They arranged themselves in careful hierarchies, those closest to power in the front, observers along the walls. Isla stood in her designated corner behind the foreign dignitaries. Her presence, so expected it, had become invisible. From there, she watched Lord Marcus take his position at the center of the room, watched Edmund enter looking ill, watched Duke Adrian Vane walk to the front with the same controlled calm he carried everywhere. Marcus began with sympathy. He spoke of family, of duty, of the heavy burden of leadership. He expressed concern, only concern, he stressed, about recent decisions. The hasty land reforms that had angered traditional families. The military promotions granted to common-born officers over nobility. The Duke's continued unmarried state, his isolation, his distance from those who cared for him most. Each point landed carefully, building a portrait of a man overwhelmed by responsibility, perhaps unsuited to the role he had inherited. And through it all, Adrian stood silent, his expression unreadable. Then Marcus shifted. But what troubles me most, he said, his voice heavy with regret, is the question that haunts this family still. Why Adrian was not present when our brother, his father, drew his final breath. The room tensed immediately. This was no longer about policy disagreements. This was about character, about loyalty, about the fundamental question of whether Duke Adrian Vane deserved the title he held. I was serving the crown, Adrian said quietly. So you have claimed. Marcus's tone remained gentle, devastating. Yet others managed to secure leave. Others found ways home to their dying fathers. What command was so vital it required your specific presence? What mission justified abandoning family? Adrian's jaw tightened, but he did not answer. Because the mission had been classified. Because the operation he had led saved 300 lives, but remained sealed in military archives. Because explaining would require breaking oaths he had sworn to men who trusted him. Your silence speaks clearly, Marcus continued, as does your brother's grief. Edmund, you were there. You held your father's hand as he, stop. Edmund's voice cut through the hall, strangled and desperate, but he said nothing more. He looked toward Adrian with an expression caught between anger and pleading, waiting, hoping for his brother to finally defend himself. Adrian remained silent, and Isla understood, watching his careful stillness, that he would not break his vows even to save himself. That he had decided long ago some things mattered more than reputation. Lord Marcus sighed with theatrical sorrow. Then perhaps the title should pass to someone capable of honoring it properly. I propose. He was under sealed orders from the crown. The voice that interrupted was not loud, but it carried with absolute clarity through the sudden silence. Every head turned toward the corner where translators and scribes stood forgotten. Isla stepped forward, her heart pounding, but her voice steady. Duke Adrian Vane was under sealed orders from the crown. He led a classified mission that could not be abandoned without risking hundreds of lives. He requested leave 17 times. Each request was denied by direct military command. Lord Marcus's expression shifted into something dangerous. And how would a translator know such things? Because I have read the correspondence. The military archives. The letters. She looked directly at Marcus now. Including the ones you sent to the War Office requesting Duke Adrian's orders be extended. Twice. The words landed like stones into still water. Ripples of shock moved through the crowd. Edmund made a sound between a gasp and a sob. And Adrian stared at her with an expression she could not name. Marcus recovered quickly, his voice hardening. Sealed documents are sealed for reason. You overstep your authority dramatically. I overstep nothing. I perform my function. Isla's hands were steady at her sides despite the weight of every watching eye. You called this gathering to question the Duke's honor. But honor does not require defending oneself when doing so would endanger others. Honor is maintaining vows even when silence costs everything. This is outrageous, Marcus snapped. A servant cannot. She speaks truth. The new voice came from the doorway. A military officer Isla recognized from correspondence, General Ashford, recently returned from the continent. He moved through the crowd with absolute authority. I can confirm Duke Adrian Vane's service was both classified and essential. I can further confirm that Lord Marcus Vane did indeed request his nephew's deployment be extended. He looked at Marcus with open contempt. Twice, while his brother lay dying. The hall erupted. Voices rose in shock and accusation. Edmund staggered as though struck, his face white. And Marcus looked between Isla and the general with an expression of pure fury before turning and leaving the hall without another word. Through it all, Adrian remained perfectly still. Until, very slowly, he turned to look at Isla, not with gratitude alone, but with something far more complicated. Recognition, perhaps, or the beginning of understanding that the quiet woman in the corner had just risked everything to defend him when his own brother would not. When the hall finally cleared, when the last whispers faded and only servants remained cleaning up the aftermath, Edmund approached his brother for the first time in months. Adrian, I should have. I know, Adrian said quietly. Then, after a pause that held years of grief, I'm sorry I couldn't tell you. Edmund nodded, tears streaming silently down his face. And for the first time since their father's death, the brothers stood in the same room without the weight of accusation between them. But it was not Edmund that Adrian sought afterward. It was the translator who had disappeared back into her corner, as if defending a duke's honor before the entire nobility was merely another task to be completed and forgotten. Isla was packing when Adrian found her. Not frantically, not emotionally, but with the same quiet efficiency she brought to everything. Her 2 cases lay open on the narrow bed, her few belongings folded with care. "What are you doing?" This voice came from the doorway, careful, controlled. "Preparing to leave, Your Grace." "I did not dismiss you." "No." Isla folded another dress without looking up. "But I overstepped my position rather dramatically this afternoon. I thought it best to make the decision simple." Adrian stepped into the small room, and somehow his presence made it feel even smaller. "You defended me. I spoke the truth. You risked your reputation, your position, your safety." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a weight she had never heard before. "Why?" Isla's hands stilled on the fabric. For a long moment, she considered giving him the simple answer, the one that fit her role. Instead, she told the truth. "Because I have spent weeks watching you carry burdens alone. Watching you maintain honor even when it cost you everything. Watching you protect your brother's grief at the expense of your own." She finally looked at him. "Because someone needed to speak, and no one else would. Edmund couldn't. He didn't know." "I am not speaking of Edmund." The understanding settled over Adrian slowly. She meant the others. The families who had watched Marcus manipulate the narrative for months. The nobles who had whispered about Adrian's absence while knowing military service was not optional. The allies who had remained silent because supporting the Duke offered no advantage compared to the uncertainty Marcus promised. She had defended him when even those bound by loyalty had chosen comfortable silence. Adrian moved further into the room, and this time there was nothing controlled about the movement. "You cannot leave." "Your Grace, Adrian." "My name is Adrian." He stopped a careful distance away, as if afraid of crowding her. "And I am asking, not as a duke, but as someone who has forgotten what it feels like when another person sees clearly through all the walls I'd build. Please do not leave." Isla's breath caught. The scandal will be significant. A translator speaking against a lord. Society will. Society has already proven its worth. His expression remained steady, but something in his eyes betrayed the careful facade. "You stood in a room of nobles and spoke truth when my own blood remained silent. You risked everything for honor that was not even yours to defend." He paused. "Do you know what that means to someone who has spent years believing honor required isolation?" "Adrian." "It means you are not merely a translator. You are someone who sees what matters and acts without waiting for permission or safety." His voice dropped lower. "Someone I did not know I needed until you stood in that hall and changed everything." "I only spoke the truth." Truth spoken requires courage, especially when it protects someone else. He took another step closer. "I have been alone since my father died. Alone through war, through grief, through returning home to a brother who hated me for sins I could not explain. I accepted it because I believed it was necessary. That distance protected people. And now," Isla asked softly, "now I understand that distance only protects against one thing: living." Adrian looked at her with an intensity that made the small room feel unbearably full. "You made me want to stop protecting myself from that." Isla felt tears threaten, unexpected and unwelcome. "Your world and mine. My world needs changing. You proved that today." He smiled then, small but genuine. "Besides, I have spent months watching you navigate 7 languages, mediate diplomatic crises, and translate documents no one else could read. You possess skills most nobles cannot imagine and intelligence this estate desperately needs. That is not the same as." She could not finish the sentence because the hope in it felt too dangerous. "As what?" "As being someone I choose. Someone I trust." Adrian reached out slowly, giving her every chance to retreat, and took her hand. "Isla Thorne, you defended my honor when my own brother would not. You spoke truth when silence was easier. You saw me, truly saw me, when I had convinced myself invisibility was strength." His thumb brushed across her knuckles. "You are worth more than every title in that hall. And if you leave now, I think you will take the only warmth this estate has known in years with you." The tears fell then, silent and inevitable. "I am terrified." "So am I." His honesty landed between them, simple and devastating. "But I have spent too long choosing fear over life, choosing duty over happiness. choosing silence over defending what matters. He squeezed her hand gently. Stay, please. Not as a translator. As someone I wish to know. As someone I. He stopped, the control finally cracking completely. As someone I am beginning to love. Isla looked at their joined hands, at the Duke who had learned to carry burdens alone, at the choice forming in the space between them. Society will be brutal. Society has already shown its cruelty. I find I no longer care what they think. Edmund came to me an hour ago. Apologized. Thank you. Adrian's expression softened. He asked me to convince you to stay. Said Vane Hall needs someone brave enough to speak truth. And you? What do you need? The question hung in the air between them, weighted with everything unsaid. Adrian lifted his free hand slowly and touched her face with a gentleness that seemed impossible from someone so controlled. I need to stop believing I must carry everything alone. I need to learn how to let someone see me without fear. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. I need you, not for what you do, but for who you are. Isla closed her eyes, feeling the careful touch against her cheek, the warmth of his hand still holding hers. When she opened them again, she saw not the distant Duke the world feared, but a man who had forgotten how to be anything except strong until someone reminded him that strength could include softness. I will stay, she said quietly, but not in corners. Not invisible. Never invisible again. I promise you that. The kiss, when it came, was gentle and inevitable. A beginning rather than a continuation. And when they finally drew apart, Isla realized the small room felt different, not cramped, but intimate. Safe. Downstairs, Edmund passed the servants' corridor and heard laughter drifting from the doorway. His brother's laugh, unfamiliar and genuine. He smiled despite the tears still wet on his own face and continued walking, already drafting the letter in his mind. An apology. A beginning. In the great hall, General Ashford shared wine with several officers and spoke quietly of the Duke's wartime service. Truths finally allowed to surface now that secrecy no longer served purpose. And in the small room where everything had changed, Duke Adrian Vane held the hand of a translator who had defended his honor when no one else would, and understood for the first time in years that some walls were meant to be broken, that some silences should end, that love, when it came from someone brave enough to speak truth, was worth more than every title he had ever carried. 6 months later, when Isla Thorne became the Duchess of Vane in a ceremony attended by dignitaries from 7 countries, society whispered for precisely 1 week before moving on to newer scandals. The Vane brothers stood together throughout, reconciled through grief finally shared. And when the new Duchess spoke her vows in flawless ceremonial Latin, then repeated them in 6 other languages so that every guest might understand, even the most skeptical nobles admitted that perhaps the Duke had chosen more wisely than tradition would have allowed. But Adrian knew the truth. He had not chosen wisely. He had been saved by someone brave enough to choose him first. Someone who saw worth where others saw only silence. Someone who proved that the greatest honor was not in title or blood, but in standing beside someone when the world expected you to stand aside. And in the quiet moments afterward, when ceremony ended and life began again, he would take her hand and remember the afternoon she had stepped forward in a crowded hall and changed everything with nothing more than truth spoken at the right moment. Some loyalties, he learned, are born, not from obligation but from recognition, from seeing clearly what others miss, from defending not what is easy, but what is right. And those loyalties, he discovered, were worth more than kingdoms.